Yeah, I mean, look, the far left in America is allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm not joking. I would have struggled to predict 20 years ago that, not even like radical left, but even the just left would be allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. But that's where we are. And that's not my party. With the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration, they have unfrozen about $100 billion in Iranian funds. That's unbelievable to me. Iranian proxies have carried out over 300 attacks against U.S. bases and American naval vessels in the Middle East. And, the idea that we would unfreeze $100 billion from the people attacking us, that is just insane policy to me. And anyways, I was a Democrat and now I'm very much not. But I don't think that the views of the Democratic Party today reflect the views of the party 20 years ago.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest, someone who, I guess, as a person with views who I admire and appreciate, and I'll explain why soon. I've known Shaun since basically October 7th on X. And so today we're going to speak with Shaun Maguire. He's a partner at Sequoia Capital, and I'll just give a little bit about it, what he does there. At Sequoia, he led investments into companies like SpaceX, the Boring Company, and X, among others. Prior to that, he co-founded a company called Expanse that was sold to Palo Alto Networks for more than $1 billion. And he worked in the past at DARPA and was deployed into Afghanistan. And we'll ask him about that because I wanted to ask you about your post about Trump, which you mentioned a lot about the Afghanistan withdrawal that made you amazed, basically. I guess you'll say. So, Shaun, before that, let me just say welcome to the show. And these are crazy times, so it's good to talk to someone like-minded.
Thrilled to be here. Very crazy times. I think it's always crazy in Israel, though, and has been for millennia. And so we should, we have to live our lives and enjoy them even during the chaos.
I agree. Shaun, let me maybe just ask before we get into any of the specific questions that I want to ask you, what did October 7th, I was here in Israel. We were in shock as an American living in America, as a Jewish American, someone who we would describe yourself as a Zionist. What did it feel that day and maybe the days after when you realized maybe not everyone in America was with us?
First of all, to everyone listening, I'm lucky to be here. It's hard to explain how much I love Israel, how much Israel means to me. I'm sure we'll get into that to some extent. And anyone that follows me on Twitter, especially in the early days after October 7th, will understand that. I just bought a house in Israel. I just closed on a house. And my wife is Israeli American, dual citizen, was mainly raised in America, but her grandfather fought in the War of Independence. And, she was raised back and forth. And also since October 7th, I've been in Israel for about 3 months of it. And so even though I'm an American Jew that speaks basically no Hebrew, I think I have, I'm also have one toe or a couple toes in Israel and hopefully more in the future. Yeah. So I say all that to prime, this is probably going to come across the wrong way, but October 7th wasn't a surprise to me at all. And there's basically nothing that has happened on or after that has surprised me thus far related to the war. I'm surprised all the time in other areas of life, but this is not one of them. And I know that sounds crazy. I know that sounds, maybe foolish, arrogant, but I really mean it when I say that. And to anyone that doesn't believe me, you can go look at my Twitter starting on, within an hour of October 7th, attacks. So starting around 10 p.m. Pacific time on October 6th or 8 a.m. local time in Israel on October 7th, where I started tweeting. And part of why I wasn't surprised is, I used to work in intelligence. follow Iran incredibly closely. One of the lessons I had working in intelligence is you have to listen to very, very small signals. Like like the sounds of animals will tell you when an attack is about to happen. And it's not them getting louder, it's them going quiet, for example. And just when you have that mentality, in the case of October 7th, I mean, for me, there were a few things that telegraphed that it was about to happen. The two different categories are, one, Iran held like by far their biggest and also like a novel military parade in late September. I think it was roughly September 23rd, 2023. So about 2 weeks before October 7th, where basically they had a very large military parade where, moving around ballistic missile launchers. But the thing that really caught my attention there is they had probably a 200-meter long kind of like flag on the ground that was half written in Farsi, half written in Hebrew. And it basically said like death to Israel. But I had never seen like a Hebrew writing in any of these military parades. And then the Ayatollah in Iran, he normally will only he'll tweet death to Israel once or twice a year normally, but not like 2 to 3 times a week. And the week before October 7th, he tweeted like roughly 3 times. I think it was 3 times. One of those may have been reposting one of his posts, but he tweeted 3 times right before October 7th that Israel is about to be destroyed and Israel is going to be destroyed imminently. And I've just learned that you have to listen to these small signals. And it's not to criticize Israeli intelligence. Like Israeli intelligence is unbelievably good. And, there's threat of attacks at all moments, like, teasing out the false negatives from the false positives from the actual positives. Like it's an incredibly hard needle in the haystack problem. But this was just like, for me, I was on ultra high alert. And I was at a Shabbat in Los Angeles. We had some Israeli family at Shabbat with us. And so when October 7th started, their phones were just going crazy with, alerts. And, people were very nonchalant. But to me, I knew instantly that this was something different, something big, because when you pair the foreshadowing that Iran had put in with, an attack happening, it was just clear to me instantly that it was bigger. And, I just haven't been surprised by really anything. I haven't been surprised by the, response in America or the response in the West more broadly. And I'm happy to give you my predictions for the future, but
you give me the lottery ticket numbers. But I guess one thing that I would push back on is that at least I hear do criticize the Israeli intelligence, and they themselves have accepted the criticism as valid, and that's why the head of the army intelligence has already resigned, and
head of Mossad resigned. I'm sorry. Head of 8200, yeah, Shimoni time. I just don't think it's my place to criticize the IDF, and I really deeply respect. I think it's Yossi was the head of 8200 who wrote a letter and resigned.
A few of them did. Habiba, which was the top general, resigned a few days ago, and the head of Shimoni time 8200 resigned. And I'm not a military correspondent, so I don't know all the names, but
I read Yossi, the head of Shimoni Times, resignation letter, and I felt like it was very touching and heartfelt. And I can't imagine the sense of guilt that people would feel. And so I don't want to pile on to that. And I really want to acknowledge how hard of a problem, military intelligence is.
Yeah. With that, I agree. Let me just then go to why I found you so interesting was that you are someone who obviously works in a field that I'm not into, but most people at your stature would just be quiet. You don't want to get into danger. You don't want to lose contacts. You don't want to lose friends. You obviously don't want to lose business opportunities. And you're obviously in social circles with a lot of people who maybe would find your opinions, which I'm going to just ask you about in a few seconds, not too favorable. So you wrote on May 31 this year that you were donating $300,000 to Donald Trump's campaign and that you're supporting him. And you said, I'm going to lose friends and I might lose business opportunities. People will be angry at me. And that you then wrote a long explanation going issue by issue about why you felt that it was important for you to support Trump. And so, first of all, was there blowback on a personal level from people around you?
Yeah, I've had extreme blowback since October 7th. Like I would say I've now been very outspoken on 4 issues since October 7th. And the first was, being very pro-Israel, and just completely unabashedly pro-Israel. Part of my motivation for being so outspoken so early was to hopefully help break the path for other people to do it. And so I've been less outspoken for Israel the last 2 or 3 months because I feel like, it's like when you punch a seal in a vacuum, then the air will come in. Like I feel like there's now really incredible people that are carrying that baton. But in the early days, I wanted to, by sticking my neck out, I knew it would make it easier for other people in business, at least, to speak out. So October 7th was the first. I had people try to get me fired. I got many death threats, like dozens of credible death threats. Many people, lost many friends, many people saying bad things about me behind my back. But I'm okay with that. Like I feel like it was morally the right thing to do. And I am, I feel proud of myself, to be candid, like for being willing to sacrifice monetary gain and take personal risk. So that was the first issue. The second issue was DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is another lightning rod issue.
Yeah.
The third was when I came out in support of President Trump. And I'll just say on that, most of your listeners probably don't know me, but in the past, I was a Democrat. Like in 2016, I donated to Hillary Clinton, voted for Hillary. And at the time, I was very afraid of Donald Trump. I had really drunk what I would call the media Kool-Aid around how the world would end with Trump and how he was a Russian asset and, all sorts of other things that I now believe were fabrications. And then the fourth most recent one, and the ironic thing is, this one is the most controversial, even though it shouldn't be. I think America should have secure presidential elections. And how this is a controversial point of view. Like in the state of California where I live, California just made it illegal to require voter identification. So you can now no longer require any form of identification for elections in California. And that's a crazy thing. Like, and it's basically impossible to ever audit an election in the future if you don't have any form of identification. And we don't even have like signature verification. There is no form of identification. We're just relying on people's, honor or trust that they are who they say they are. And in a world where I think a lot about like foreign adversaries, I think a lot about spy operations, to be very blunt. And, in a world where you can have intelligence services doing pager operations or something that just happened in America that I think very few people followed, but is unbelievable. There was just a prisoner swap for some American captives in Russia for Russian spies. This primarily for Evan Gersowich, the Wall Street Journal reporter. But in exchange, if you go look at the people that were swapped back to Russia, there was an unbelievable story. Like I think one of the most interesting spy stories that's public in decades, which is like there's a TV show in America called The Americans, which the idea is families that go deep undercover, during the Cold War, say move to America in the 70s or 80s, build their lives and even raise children, and their children don't know that they're Russian. They think the children think they're American, which gives cover. That just happened in America. Like there were some Russian spies. If you search for Putin Buenas noches, you will find them. So basically these kids had no idea they're Russian. They were teenagers, and their parents got swapped back in this prisoner exchange. On the plane flight back to Russia is the first time they learned they're Russian. They speak English and Spanish. And so when they landed, Putin greeted them on the tarmac. You can watch a video of this. He greets them on the tarmac, the children, by saying, Buenas noches. And it's just when you're living in a world where those things are happening, the idea that people wouldn't go try to interfere in elections if they can, that's just kind of a crazy idea to me. And I just...
So why don't they, why are they, for example, the law in California, is that because you think that they actually want to cheat?
This is now getting even more controversial. When you go into the specific, it gets even more controversial. But yes, I believe that. I believe the only reason to pass a law where it's illegal to require identification for voting is because you want cheating to be okay. It's the only realistic explanation in my mind. And I have worked on election security. I've worked on election security, and I've seen some of the methods of cheating firsthand. And so I really do believe that.
Usually they'll say like it's a racist thing because Black people don't have the means to get voter ID. And then, but when you ask, if I remember correctly, Black Americans, African Americans, if they are pro voter ID, they themselves usually are overwhelmingly for it. And so it doesn't make any sense in terms of how the African American community itself looks at the issue.
They also African Americans need ID for everything else in their life. They need it to drive cars. They need it to they need it to buy alcohol. They need it to receive welfare. It's not. You're exactly right. Like it's not actually an issue in African American communities. They have very high rates of having identification. Basically, everyone in America has identification. So I think it's racist to say that African Americans struggle to get identification. I don't think that that's the real reason.
So can I ask you again go back to your post about Trump, just because I found it so interesting that someone of your stature is willing to, I guess, put himself out there politically in a way that you maybe weren't, or other people like you weren't in the past willing to do it. We saw with Elon Musk, obviously lately in Pennsylvania, he was there with Trump, but mostly, if I remember, growing up in Brooklyn, New York, as an ultra-Orthodox kid in a Hasidic community, very different from where you are, but at the same time following the news. When I was growing up in the 90s and at early 2000s, all the rich people seemed to be, at least in my personal area, and the Democrat side, it seemed to me. And people were liberal. But it seems, and this you write about a lot on Twitter, is that Elon Musk calls it the woke mind virus. It seems that the left has gone so far to the left that it's not liberal anymore. It's the opposite.
Yeah. Look, the far left in America is allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm not joking. And it's like, I would have struggled to predict 20 years ago that not even like radical left, but even the like just left would be allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. But that's where we are. And that's not my party. And it'll just to go further, like, with the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration, they have unfrozen about $100 billion in Iranian funds. Like that's unbelievable to me. Iran has carried out, and as much as I love Israel, not even talking about Israel, Iranian proxies have carried out over 300 attacks against U.S. bases and American naval vessels in the Middle East since October 7th. And like the idea that we would unfreeze $100 billion from the people attacking us. Like, that is just insane policy to me. And anyways, I was a Democrat and now I'm very much not. But I don't think that the views of the Democratic Party today reflect the views of the party 20 years ago.
Yeah, you look at, I did an article about 4 years ago about the differences between the Clinton White House and the Biden when he was coming in. His stated positions were so different than Bill Clinton. Not too long ago, he's still an icon, but it's like Bill Clinton was moving to the center. Biden is moving, I think, way to the left. So you mentioned a few issues in your letter, which I wanted to go through. One was Israel. Maybe you can just explain to us what the Biden administration is doing on Israel is so. Maybe just ask us, what do you think about how they've been handling Israel since, even before October 7th, but obviously since?
So if you go back to the Obama administration, Obama was the kind of president that changed course with Iran policy, where he had this point of view that, we've been too hard on Iran. If we go and be really nice to them, then maybe they'll become reasonable and come in from the cold. And I personally think that was an incredibly stupid, backwards policy that was like obviously a bad idea from the beginning. For sure, my wife is a Persian Jew. Her family's from
my
Iran.
wife too.
Yeah, and that's amazing. God bless you. So, I'm just kidding.
They make good food.
They make amazing food, amazing culture. But if you look at the Obama policy, it just didn't make any sense to me. Like, there was a nuclear agreement, but that had no real inspection teeth, so you couldn't know what they're actually doing. In general, I feel like Obama, he had a goal of signing policies where the headline would be good, but the details would be bad. And it's like, I think the Iran nuclear deal, the headline was great. Oh, wow, you're signing a nuclear agreement with Iran. They're not going to develop nuclear weapons. Except there were no teeth to it, and there were no real inspection abilities. And I just don't think you can take Iran at their word. Like, they'll say they're going to do one thing, and then they'll go do the opposite. I think another example that somehow people don't appreciate this, but if you go back to the Obama administration, there was this big thing called the Paris Climate Accords. Climate change is a huge issue. Let's go solve it by capping everyone's, carbon emissions and forcing reduction, cooperating on this. A very reasonable, kind of lofty goal, and signing the Paris Climate Accords created a great headline, with the one giant issue that the actual details of the deal had, in my opinion, the opposite effect of the goal. And the detail that people have wrong is that back then, and even more so today, China is by far the world's biggest carbon emitter. Like, you can't even make a dent in climate change unless China is cooperating. And the details of that agreement, I don't remember the year it was signed, call it 2015 or something.
Give or take, yeah.
The way it was designed is that everyone else, their carbon emissions would get capped right around then, I think the year of signature, roughly 2015, and they would have to start reducing from that year. China got an exemption where their cap wouldn't start until 2030. And whatever their emissions were in the year 2030, then they would have to reduce from 2030. But this actually creates a perverse incentive. It incentivizes China, which was already 40% of the world's carbon emissions, to emit as much as possible, in 2030, so that they'd be capped at this extremely high baseline. And so this deal that sounded great of, we're going to go solve climate change, everyone's cooperating, even China signing it. Well, actually, China gets a special, exemption where they're capped at 2030 exemption. So they're literally, this agreement is incentivizing them to have bad behavior. And it's just like, these are the types of things that were happening in the Obama administration that were very disappointing for me. And I think that this has kind of been a good encapsulation of the Democrats' policies, especially foreign policies, the last 20 years. And as far as it pertains to Israel, I mean, look, bad Iran policy is a disaster for Israel. A weak America is a disaster for Israel, because like a weak America makes, great powers and regional powers in the Middle East more emboldened to, push boundaries. And I think that, because the Democrats have tried to bring in the far left because they feel like they need their votes, and candidly, they are at risk of losing their votes. Like, people in the far left in America are considering either not voting or voting for third-party candidates such as Cornel West, or Jill Stein, the Green candidate. And like, the Democrats need their votes. And so in part due to that, they have kind of been trying to walk this line with Israel where they act really tough and, like, act against Israel, withhold arms shipments, withhold funding, don't, like, abstain from votes at the UN, etc. And like, that just emboldens Israel's enemies. And for me, going beyond, I really like, for me as an American, I really think it's important from an intellectual honesty perspective to think about every issue is like, what is in the best interest of America? What is in the best interest of Israel? And I think it's very rare where those are not the same outcome, but occasionally it is. And I have to be intellectually honest when that's the case. I do not think that this war there are different incentives. I like a few things. One, I think the general public doesn't understand how reliant America is on Israel. So the way that people in America and most of the world view the Israel-America relationship is that, 98% of the benefit accrues to Israel and 2% to America. And I think that was probably the case 50 years ago. Like, if you go to the War of 67 or something, I think it was something like that. Today, I think it's more like 60% of the benefit accrues to Israel, 40% to America. Like, Israel is the world's best cyber power today, and there's a lot of joint cooperation. There's all sorts of military technology that America relies on Israel for. There's all sorts of intelligence operations that America relies on Israel for. And, you have, in terms of, like, you look at the Hezbollah operations, you have terrorists that killed hundreds of Marines that have been on America's, like, most wanted list with bounties on their heads for decades, like, finally getting killed. And it's just like, to me, this is very much, everything happening in Israel and supporting Israel is very much in America's interest. But the Biden administration, due to having this small minority in their base that just absolutely hates Jews, it's not even just Israel, it's like they just hate Jews. They're trying to appease that group and walk this fine line. And I think it's only going to get worse and worse inside the Democratic Party in the future. Last thing I'll say on this is, to his credit, I believe that Joe Biden has a lot of moral clarity on this issue. And I think that Joe Biden as an individual has been a good ally of Israel. But I think it's like the people on his National Security Council, in his administration, in his cabinet, and then in his base that are putting so much pressure on him. And I guess really the last thing is, I believe Joe Biden is now, like, extremely old, like, basically demented. And I don't think he's capable, even if he has had a great heart and was very capable 5 years ago, I don't think he is anymore. And so I think heavily manipulated by the people around him. And I think a lot of those people are like, I just don't think that they understand the world clearly.
Yeah. I just want to ask you, maybe you said you weren't surprised by the reaction in the US after what happened on October 7th. So one of the things that I want to maybe ask you forward to be our prophet maybe in a bad way is, it seems to me that the younger generation of Americans are indoctrinated in a way that generations in the past have never been. I mean, we've always heard radicals in the universities, and you have a PhD from a university. I have a master's in Israel. It's different. But the point is that there was always radicals, but I don't think it was ever this way. And I think when you mentioned the DEI before, it just shows that we usually used to think that the radicals got a job and then they stopped being crazy. And now it's moved up where they leave university and they're moving with the radicalism into the business world, the diplomatic world, the government world. And it seems like the young guns, so to speak, in the Democrat Party are almost all part of the, even if not called the squad, they're adjacent to the squad, most of them. So should we in Israel be very worried, or even Jews in America, about what's to come?
So I'll answer this in two parts, and with everything I give long answers. But for Jews in Israel and Israelis more broadly, I think Israelis should be optimistic. And I know that is an extremely contrarian statement, and it's hard for people to feel optimistic right now and again, I spent 3 months in Israel since October 7th. I feel people's pain. I know how hard of a time it's been. And I wrote another essay that didn't get as much, the Trump essay got more than 20 million direct views. I wrote a letter of optimism to Israel. It's what it was called. That got maybe 1 million or 2 million views recently. And so I outlined some of these thoughts there, but I think sometimes you have to look in the longer arc of history. You have to think about what Israel has accomplished in 75 years and where it was in the past. And even 20 years ago, Israel relied on the outside world for energy. Now Israel's not just energy independent, is an exporter of energy. Israel relied on the outside world for water, or at least the water reserves were depleting. The Sea of Galilee was shrinking, and now Israel is a water exporter, exporting water to Jordan. That's unimaginable. To me, that would have been unimaginable 25 years ago or 20 years ago. And it's incredibly strategic. It's part of why Jordan has been, flying fighter jets to intercept, Iranian drones is it's not because they love Israel. It's because they rely on Israel, and Israel has something absolutely necessary to offer, which is, water and technology and power. And for the king there, it's obviously he's a ethnic minority Hashemite in a country that has roughly 50% Palestinians. Half of the country hates the fact that he's supporting Israel, but he's doing anyways. And it's he has to choose: either Israel cuts off the water and power, and that will certainly lead to a civil war right now, or he can, support Israel, and that will increase frustration amongst the base, but it's kind of more of a longer term existential risk. So there's no good decision for him, but we saw the decision he made. Israel is now almost fully self-reliant. On an arc of history, the progress is unbelievable. Israel's now one of the best technology ecosystems in the world for technology companies. And I know, for its worth, I know that doesn't trickle down to everyone there. And there's so many people in Israel that are struggling economically right now, especially young people. And I also think Israel with the Abraham Accords got peace agreements with UAE and Kuwait and other countries. To me, I don't think that that was just Donald Trump. Even though I'm voting for Trump and think he has some great policies, I think the biggest part of that, I think that the Trump administration played a key role, but I think the most important thing is Israel had something to offer. And I can say this because I'm an American and I figured this out on the outside as someone that used to work in cybersecurity, but Israel armed UAE with cyber weapons. And it's very clear when you enter UAE and like you can't make WhatsApp calls because, I think that's probably the one encryption that they weren't able to, that UAE can't monitor. So they just don't let you make the calls. And, this was a year ago. It was the last time I did that. But it's clear when you look at Pegasus and some of the things that have been publicly known that Israel offered cyber weapons, and that's incredible. Like peace through strength, peace through having something essential to offer. So I'm actually quite optimistic on Israel. I think that things in the region are trending quite well for Israel. Like I personally believe a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia is very soon. And I think it was weeks away when October 7th happened, which was a big part of why it happened when it did. If you look in the region, like many of the countries have banned, like they're banning indoctrination against Israel. And really like being very strict on that. I think that the success of the Lebanon operation thus far, and there's a lot more to happen, but I think that has sent an incredible message into the region about the strength of Israel. I think it's wildly weakened Iran. And I think that there's more that will happen in the next 3 months. So I could go on and on, but I'm actually very optimistic about Israel. Just needs to get through this war and then kind of rebuild the economy and get even stronger. In terms of America, or like Jews in America in the West, I'm quite pessimistic for Jews in Europe. I think that you see the writing on the wall, and it's already become pretty inhospitable for them there. In America, I think that this is a very important election. I personally believe that if Trump wins, that I think that it at least extends kind of the way that things have been for Jews in America by another decade. I think that there are still issues, for the future, but I think it would be very, very good for Jews if Trump wins. And if Trump loses, I'm very pessimistic for Jews in America. I think that, as you pointed out, the like young generations of Democrat, and you could ask why it matters. There's many different reasons, but one is just like a deterrent. And when people get rewarded for being anti-Semitic, then they'll do more of it. Like they want to do it. It's in a lot of people, like in their hearts, they want to be anti-Semitic. They get great pleasure out of it. It makes them feel better about themselves. But, when you can show that it doesn't work politically, you'll lose elections and you'll lose seats in the House, etc., for being anti-Semitic, then the Democratic Party, I think, will be more proactive about weeding that out. They'll view it as a losing strategy. And that, I think, will change their tactics for the elections 4 years from now and change some of the policies and all that. But that said, I think the biggest force with anti-Semitism in history, and this, I am not a historian. There's many scholars of this that know vastly more than I do, but I've kind of done my own studying of this. I've been to over 100 countries. I've tried, including 20 plus Muslim countries. By having the name Shaun Maguire, it was a gift. I was able to go to places that Jews are banned from going, and I was stupid for going, but I wanted to learn what people actually think. But as kind of a self-student of Jewish history, I personally believe that almost always the precondition for anti-Semitism is when an empire starts to decline. And it's even stronger than like the economy being bad, because the economy being bad can just be a local cycle. It's much bigger. It's when like the macro cycle, when an empire starts to decline, I think that's when, people start to feel like their long-term future is going to be worse than what they thought it would be. They want someone to blame. Politicians want someone to blame. The guard of society goes down. Like people want to extend the good times by taking assets from someone, and Jews kind of by definition are always a small minority, and due to culture, oftentimes end up accumulating a lot of assets in countries. But I think when you look at 95% of the worst examples of anti-Semitism in history, I think that there was like a empire in decline that preceded it. And that include like a lot of the Middle Eastern, examples, and so I think that's the dominant variable in the West. I think in Europe, we are seeing just like a real, economic decline there in addition to immigration. But I think those things are correlated. And in America, if America has over $34 trillion of debt. And if America doesn't make good decisions the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will go a similar path as Europe. And that would be horrible for Jews. But I'm doing everything I can to try to fight for America and try to fight for the American economy and try to avoid that.
Shaun, one thing that you spoke about was the woke mind virus. You've been speaking about it a lot. And one of the things that I think we can maybe tell me if you agree on is the reason why the woke mind virus brings a lot of people to hate Jews is that the whole premise of being woke nowadays is that there's whoever is successful, whichever minority or ethnic group is successful, they're inherently evil. So Asians, for example, are being, I don't know anymore. We'll see if they abide by the Supreme Court decision, but Harvard is lowering the number of Asians there, even though they're very smart, have good marks on SATs. Jews also have been going down the numbers in Ivy Leagues. And so Jews are very successful and they're a minority. And so they don't fit the way they look at minorities, that at having to be poor and uneducated, etc. And so they hate Jews because they don't fit the stereotype. Do you think there's something to what I just said?
Yes, I think there's something to what you said. I think just a very, very simple psychology here is like the schoolyard bully tactics. And like for myself as a kid, like looking back on my childhood, and I made the mistake of letting people get to me, but I was pretty smart, and kids in my class, they used to tease me for being too smart and for trying too hard in school. They used to tease me and say, "You try too hard in school. Like, what a loser. Like, why do you actually care about school?" And it honestly kind of got to me. And I ended up trying less hard in school because it was like either you can be smart or smart and academically successful, or you can be cool. And it's hard to not choose the latter. And the thing that really stuck with me about that experience was it's just so easy when all they have to do is just say some words, like tease you, and then you'll maybe change your own behavior, and then now bring the bar down in the class and make their life easier. All they did was say a couple words, and now their life is easier. They don't have to work as hard in school to be better on a relative basis. Like, kind of human nature to do that. And I think that's on the individual level. When you aggregate onto the group level, it's just easy for people to justify, there's too many Asians at school, or, there's not enough people of this one ethnic group, or we should have, we should have a different standard. It just becomes, it's just so easy to do that. And people don't really think through the consequences of it. And So anyways, I just think there's really basic primal psychology behind all this stuff.
Can I ask you just about free speech? So, you're very, I think, tell me, you invested in, you put money into Elon's companies and you were very active on X. And tell me if not, you also put money into X in his acquisition. So his approach to free speech is very, very libertarian on his platforms.
Mhm.
And I think he would even admit that since he bought X and has implemented the policies, you have a lot of speech that you wouldn't have before on the
Yes.
platform, which also brings a lot of speech that I find very scary. So I'll see actual Jew hatred in the most primitive sense of the word. And it really scares me, to be honest with you, to see that people, I think a lot of people would be embarrassed to put that out there in the public square, actual public square, but on Twitter or X, they're very willing to put out what they think. And so do you think that, first of all, he did the right thing on that? And second of all, does the free speech that you see, I'm very pro free speech. It's just very scary.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with that?
Great question. So I definitely think Elon, like no one's right 100% of the time. No one is like perfectly right. But I think Elon has been like as close to right as you can be on this topic. And I want to say I have had some of these, because of how vocal I've been, I have had some of these anti-Semites come after me. Like I had Nick Fuentes come out after me a few times, and it is scary. Like when he comes after you, he has this thing that's called the Groyper Army, and they'll have, literally thousands of people will respond behind him, and they're real people, and they just absolutely hate Jews. And wow, when you feel that coming at you, like it is scary. And I've been through it myself. So I don't want to downplay how scary it is. But the other side is, if you look at TikTok has very little or like much less directly anti-Semitic content, but TikTok is like fully down voting, and under amplifying Jewish content, and there's quite a few just rigorous studies on this.
And let me just stop you there, Shaun. My friend is a former TikTok employee who was a whistleblower. He resigned from the company and was interviewed in Congress, and the Wall Street Journal had a big expose about his findings and why he exited the company. Basically, he came out and said that the top people at TikTok, the regulators of so-called of the platform, were censoring pro-Israel speech, pro-Israel content, and amplifying pro-Palestinian conflict right after October 7th. For example, ads of the hostage families were censored and stuff like really disgusting things.
For sure. And like there's this one creator where he has many followers, like roughly 20 million followers on TikTok. And he put out the same videos on TikTok, X, and Instagram. And like on X and Instagram, these videos would get, and for sure, he has 10x more followers on TikTok than on X. But on X, his video would get, tens of millions of views or whatever. And like this one video, which is a pro-Israel video, got like 3,000 views on TikTok, even though he had 17 million followers. And there's so many examples like that. I have friends that did very rigorous analysis here. And like, would I rather have a platform that is top down, choosing what topics are allowable and like what is the truth, and literally censoring the Jewish voice? Or would I rather have something that is libertarian and people can say truly vile things, but you're exposing how vile they are, and people can respond to it, and people can see what people actually think, and the Jewish voice can be amplified as well and dominate in many situations. And so I really don't think you can ever trust any central authority to like correctly deem what is misinformation, disinformation, etc. I think we went through this with coronavirus, where you couldn't talk about lab leak theories on some social platforms. Donald Trump was banned from using Twitter. The Hunter Biden laptop story, the Hunter Biden laptop was real. Right before the election, you literally could not talk about it. You could not share a link to the New York Post article, which broke the story on Facebook. You literally could not share a link of the story. And so I just yes, it's when you get confronted in the face with evil, it is very scary. But I think that the libertarian approach lets good actually fight evil, whereas otherwise evil gets to just, go unchallenged occasionally.
Yeah, I agree. I just had to ask the question.
Yeah.
Let me, about Trump, just on, you explained why, and to go into more detail, people should go read what you wrote, and I think that'd be better format for you to explain it in depth. But I just wanted to ask you about two things, if you're not worried about it. Number one is his isolationism. He has at least people around him that are very isolationist. Just, I'll give you J.D. Vance in the past was very about Ukraine. He's since said different things, but just also Tucker Carlson was very close to him. All these different people that we know his policies in his first term were very good on this. But are you not worried about these influences coming into his second term should he win? And my second worry is about the economics. Trump is very into tariffs, using it like the Chinese tariffs on steel and aluminum. Are you not worried that he will use it more broadly? I've interviewed people who worked with him. It is something that is a tendency for at least people around him. So as a person who knows economics, would you be worried about that?
Great questions. On the first one, I'm not worried about it at all. And there's 2 points there. One is that when you're negotiating, you never want to say what your actual number is or what your actual price is. You don't start with that. Israelis understand this. Anyone in the Middle East, you got negotiating skills, this. But you don't say this is my plan for Ukraine. This is exactly what I'm going to propose. If you say that, then people are just going to negotiate with you and try to move it. Something that Trump did a lot in his presidency is he would have these extreme positions. He would say these extreme positions as a starting point, but that's not where things would end up. He would negotiate from there. And he did it a lot in his first term. And so I don't know why he wouldn't do it in his second term. And the second point related to that is people were making, if you remember the things that people were saying about Trump in 2016, they were saying very similar things he's going to start World War III. It's the opposite. No wars got started while Trump was in office. There were just a lot of these things where people would say he has these policies and then he didn't, it's not what happened. And I just think we've already run this experiment. Let's not fall trap to, what happened to our biases that we fell into the last time. And on the tariffs, I am a pretty strong supporter of economic action against China. And I think that China is different than, I think that supporting tariffs on China is different than supporting tariffs on any other place. As basically, China has had an adversarial economic policy against America for more than 20 years. Most businesses have been banned from doing business in China for decades. And if you do, there have been, even if it's not directly in the form of tariffs, insane hidden taxes against businesses to operate there. And it's just led to a point where you could not have an American TikTok equivalent in China. They did not let Facebook operate at scale in China. And I think that after 20 years of one-sided policy, I think it makes a ton of sense to finally have some tit for tat retaliation, back against those policies. And so
only on China.
Only on China. I'm extremely supportive on tariffs on China, to have some level of parity in the policies. And they have tools that they can use that we can't use. Like they have because the relationship with the government and businesses is very direct in a way it's not in America. And so I think tariffs are probably the best tool for trying to get to some level of parity with China in terms of economic policy.
Shaun, before I ask you lastly about Israel and the economics here and your investments and your time here, I want to ask you, what about how Trump is? I assume you've met him. How is he as a human being? He's very, a lot of times, like you said, the media portrays him in a certain way. You said you drank the Kool-Aid in 2016, the media Kool-Aid. So maybe just shortly, what kind of a person is he?
So I'm kind of embarrassed to say I've actually never met President Trump. I've had multiple opportunities to meet him, and I expect I'll probably meet him within the next year, and I would like to, and I hope I do so. I have met JD Vance quite a few times. I've had one-on-one conversations with JD, and I know personally very well at least 30 people that work directly in Trump's cabinet, or at least in his administration. And I feel like I have a very good texture from just knowing so many people around him. With JD, I think JD is brilliant and underestimated. I think we saw it in the VP debate. Like he's extremely intelligent, extremely principled. And I think at the beginning of his career, I think we will see a lot more from JD.
And his book is amazing, by the way.
Yeah, his book is fantastic. And look, the great irony is JD is a family man. He is married to a Indian American. He and his wife both have law degrees from Yale Law School. It's the best law school in America. People, they'll try to present him as if he's some racist, evil, weird guy, but he's like a very normal, self-made family man married to, a daughter of immigrant. And so I just, the way these things get presented is just you can go see with your own eyes that it's wrong. And in the case of President Trump, the thing that really helped change my opinion of him as an individual was I had seen all these very high profile, members of his government that, left his administration and criticized him. And obviously there should be some weight put on that. And I think some of those people are, incredible humans, incredible Americans, incredible patriots, are doing what they think is best. But I actually think the majority of the people, former Republicans that have criticized Trump, are coming from what I would call the Republican machine, the RNC machine. You have to remember that Trump was the George Bush community, the neocon base of the RNC, which controlled the Republican Party in 2016. They hated Trump. They absolutely hated the guy. And a lot of people from, people like Dick Cheney is now supporting Democrat. Kamala Harris for president. Dick Cheney is a horrible person. That guy is an absolute horrible. And I've met Dick Cheney a few times. That guy is, I will happily say, he is an evil man. That is an evil man. And the fact that he is supporting Kamala, I think says a lot. That makes me want to support Trump even more. And I think there are a lot of people that are from the Dick Cheney, ilk that were part of the Republican machine. I think Trump, the quick version is when you get elected president, you have to fill about 450 executive positions in about a 2-month period. in the past, candidates had either been part of the DNC machine or the RNC machine, and they could just take the recommendations of their party. And so it was actually pretty easy to fill all those jobs. The party had the list of who should take the jobs. For President Trump, the first candidate in the modern era, it was actually hard to fill those jobs because he didn't have a list, and he was trying to hire people, kind of from outside of the machine. And so in that transition period, in those 2 months, he only hired about 150 people that were like new people. At that point, he basically took the RNC's recommendations for another 300 or so. And of the people that have criticized Trump, they're almost all the RNC recommendations in those 300. The 150 people that kind of he appointed that were more outsiders, they basically all love Trump and say very good things about his character. Not perfect things, but it's a very different narrative than kind of how it's presented in the media.
Yeah. And also you could say that was what he called the swamp. The people who live around these types of the administration switches, they get their job back and they have an interest in keeping the status quo. So when he comes in, like shakes up the status quo, these people are the first ones to get hurt. And that's why they're annoyed at him.
And I want to say, and the swamp was on both sides. It's like there's a Republican swamp and a Democratic swamp. The only thing is that Trump already kind of drained the Republican swamp, just by nature of getting elected in the first place. He took away a lot of the power from this Republican machine that had gotten built over 50 years. But that hasn't yet happened on the Democratic side.
Gotten even worse, I think.
I agree.
Objectively. Let me ask you just before we finish, because time's coming short. You mentioned that you were 3 months in Israel since October 7th. And I know that Sequoia, which we mentioned through your work there, I know that you've already decided on different investments here, and you are looking maybe for more. So maybe just give us, also this interview is going to go up in Israel's leading business paper. So just to give us a little bit business information here. First of all, where have you decided to invest? Why? And does this mean that in terms of the near future, you're optimistic about Israel? Because Israelis are very, right now, pessimistic about the economy, even in the near future, because of the war.
I'm incredibly optimistic about the tech economy and also the broader economy. I think the services economy, which was a big part of the Israeli economy, has gotten hit incredibly hard. And I think it will take a couple of years for the services economy to get back to where it was. So that is the one area where I'm negative. But the tech economy is doing better than ever. And I think that the next 10 years is going to be really incredible. And I would also say like manufacturing and, defense is doing well. And I think that the defense exports out of Israel over the next 10 years are going to be really on a different level. I think it'll end up becoming one of the world's largest, defense exporters. So I'm very optimistic about the economy. So for Sequoia, I'm one of the partners at Sequoia. I joined Sequoia 5 years ago. Sequoia formerly had an office in Israel, which was shut down a few years before I joined. The three partners that ran Sequoia Israel are all incredible people and incredible investors. One of whom, his name is Gilly Renan. He started after Sequoia something called CyberStarts. He's been the top investor in Israel the last 10 years. He was the first investor in many incredible companies like Wiz and Island and Sierra. I also want to say Sequoia has a long history of investing in Israel, even before Sequoia Israel. Like Sequoia, this is not not a company started in Israel, but it's an Israeli company. Sequoia incubated Palo Alto Networks, Nir Zook, who had been one of the founding engineers at Checkpoint, started Palo Alto Networks in the Sequoia office in Menlo Park, California. Sequoia was seed investor in Mellanox, which, was acquired by NVIDIA for $8 billion. And, Sequoia was early investor in Onavo, which was acquired for a few $100 million by Facebook, which the team has become incredibly important at Facebook. Like Guy Rosen, the founder CEO, is the global CISO of Meta. Anyways, we have a long history, but in the last 5 years since I joined, we've really taken it to another level. And, we were the second investors. Well, Gilly Renan brought Wiz to us, which we invested in Wiz, which has obviously been a huge, fast success story in Israel. We invested in a company called Island. We invested in a company called Sierra. Anyways, we've backed some of the fastest growing tech companies out of Israel over the last 5 years. And then for myself personally, my first trip to Israel after October 7th was in early November, November 17th or whatever. And on that trip, I ended up meeting a founder named Ophir Ehrlich. And Ophir started a company called Eon. I have to say, I was introduced to Ophir by an incredibly talented young South African Jew who lives in Israel. His name is Dean Meyer. Dean was not working for Sequoia at the time, but Dean joined Sequoia. And so he's our partner on the ground in Israel. Dean and I ended up leading the first round, the seed or A, but the first round in this company, Eon, Ophir Ehrlich's new company. This is Ophir's fourth company. He sold his last company to Amazon for a few $100 million, and it became, he and his co-founders became the most senior Amazon employees in Israel. We backed a defense tech company called Kella.
This is all since October 7th?
Yeah, this is all since October 7th. We backed a defense tech company called Kella Systems, incredible founders. The CEO was working at Mafat, which is, I worked at the US equivalent of Mafat at DARPA. And so it's fun to work with people from,
sixth grade. You're very optimistic on the basically the tech sector of Israel staying strong in the near future.
I am incredibly optimistic about the Israeli tech ecosystem. I think it is, in my opinion, right now, the number one tech ecosystem in the world is the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. Number two is either New York City or Tel Aviv area. But one of those is number two, one of those number three, or they're tied for number two. And then they're ahead of everywhere else in the world right now. I think
I just ask you one last thing about that is that we've been hearing in the last few weeks that a lot of people in the tech sector are saying that if the war goes on too long, and if they'll need to raise taxes more, and if Israel become more politically in turmoil internally, that they'll leave. They'll go. These jobs are easy to just walk up, take a computer, and go to Cyprus and work there. Do you think that Israel risks in any way losing its best and brightest by any internal policy in the future?
I mean, I just bought a house in Israel, so I'm serious. Like, I believe in voting with your feet, voting with your money, and I do like. I think that. So I have family that has left Israel since October 7th because, with little kids, they felt like, and, had job opportunities in America and felt like it didn't make sense. Candidly, I totally understand the decision. It makes me a little sad, but I also know quite a few people that have moved to Israel since October 7th. And so I think it goes both ways. I think that for companies, it's natural when companies are in like a sales execution mode, founders need to be close to the customers. And so if founders move to New York or London or something temporarily to be closer to customers, that makes sense. But I think the R&D is best in Israel. Like the R&D is better product and research and development is better in Israel than anywhere else. And so I think that for founders focused on like those types of things, more internal product building, I think it makes sense to stay in Israel. And I hope, I'm not too concerned about this on a large scale. But I don't think there has been some of it on a small scale.
Yeah. And we've seen a little bit of it, but I do think that with the right policies, people have a drive to be here. So if you give them the opportunity and the tools to do so, they'll come. Shaun Maguire.
I think the ones that leave will be back eventually.
I agree. In general, especially if we do as policymakers here, do the right thing. And that's what me and other people have to push to do. That's not like what you said about criticizing the army. That's not your position. You're in America and you're doing what you have to do in America, for Western civilization and for the US. And so I want to say, first of all, thank you so much, Shaun, for being with us. It was a pleasure. And also, before I let you go, I just want to say that just on a personal level, I really appreciate what you're doing, and you're putting, first of all, your money where your mouth is, but also your mouth where your mouth is. And that's something that a lot of times is much harder than just putting up money. Like you said, people are coming after you, death threats, all this kind of stuff. It's not easy. And you haven't in the past really, if you do a search on your name, not a lot of things come up before October 7th.
No, I was very private before that. It didn't, and I've completely changed.
Yeah. So I think that just on a personal level, I just wanted to thank you. And I think it's really a brave thing to do. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Means a lot. Thank you. And we're all in this together. Truly, like we're all one global tribe and community. So looking forward to meeting you in person. Thank you, Ariel.